The next glands that we're going to look at are the thyroid and the parathyroid. The thyroid gland is responsible for regulating the body's metabolic rate and also plays a role in keeping the optimal levels of calcium in our blood. And they do this through the production of a family of hormones called thyroid hormones. Unlike most hormones which have a target cell, thyroid hormones are really able to affect all cells of the body. So most cells are target cells for thyroid hormones. And this is necessary because all cells of our body perform metabolic functions, so they all benefit from thyroid hormones. When a cell receives thyroid hormone, it speeds up the metabolic rate, which means it breaks down more glucose and more energy is made. In addition to thyroid hormones, the thyroid also produces calcitonin, and when calcium levels are increased in the blood. When it releases calcitonin, this causes calcium to be removed from the bloodstream and stored in bone tissue. So when calcium levels return to normal, the production of calcitonin will be inhibited and calcium will stop being removed from the bloodstream. This is another really good example of why hormones have to be highly regulated and released only when necessary, and then degraded as soon as they have their effect. If calcitonin continued to be produced after calcium levels of the blood return to normal, then we would go in the opposite direction and we would have too little calcium in the blood. The parathyroid produces another family of hormones called parathyroid hormones, and these come into play when calcium levels in the blood come too low. When calcium levels are too low, this will be detected by the hypothalamus. Remember that link between the endo and the nervous system. And this will produce parathyroid stimulating hormone from the hypothalamus, which will cause the parathyroid to secrete parathyroid hormone. The purpose of parathyroid hormone is to release calcium into the bloodstream to bring those levels back up to normal. And that means that the target cells of parathyroid hormone are then in the bones, release of stored calcium there, and also in the kidneys, which promotes the reabsorption of calcium from that urine filtrate. The adrenal glands. The two portions of the adrenal glands, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla, operate independently, similarly to the two lobes of the pituitary gland. And these guys are located, they're called adrenal glands because they're located or they sit right on top of our kidneys. The adrenal medulla, the center portion of the gland, is under the control of the nervous system. When we experience stress of any kind, including emotional or physical causes, the hypothalamus will activate the production of hormones from the adrenal medulla. And these hormones are epinephrine and norepinephrine, which allows us to react in an emergency situation and gives us that fight or flight response. And these hormones are useful to deal with short-term stress. The hormones of the adrenal cortex, the outer region, are more useful for handling long-term stresses. So some of the hormones produced here are cortisol, which is necessary to repair damaged tissue and regulate the inflammatory response, and aldosterone targets the kidney to promote reabsorption of sodium and excretion of potassium to keep our salt-water balance of the blood at an optimum level. The adrenal cortex also produces small amounts of sex hormones in both males and females. So from your adrenal gland, you're going to produce androgen, male sex hormones, and estrogens, female sex hormones. And that's true for both men and women. So the same amount of androgens and estrogens will be produced by the adrenal cortex of a man and of a woman. The difference between our balance of sex hormones comes from the addition of testosterone and estrogen from our reproductive glands, which we'll talk about next time. And lastly, we want to know the difference between negative feedback and positive feedback mechanisms. And this is really how concentration of hormones is regulated within our bloodstream. So The majority of hormones are regulated by a negative feedback mechanism. And what happens with a negative feedback is once that hormone level starts to rise, there's more of it, that's going to be the stimulus to cause the hormone to stop being released. So the presence of the hormone itself, or the increasing concentration of the hormone itself, is going to cause it to stop being produced. That's a negative feedback mechanism. On the flip side of that, some hormones, like oxytocin, experience a positive feedback mechanism, where once that hormone starts to be released, the presence of that hormone in the blood is going to tell the body to make more of it. So once the body senses that oxytocin has been released, then the body is going to make more oxytocin. And that's an example from a childbirth situation where oxytocin stimulates the contractions of the uterus. So you want those contractions to become stronger and stronger, and that happens because of that positive feedback mechanism, where oxytocin was present in the blood to start the contractions, and then that concentration is going to continue to rise through that positive feedback mechanism and cause those contractions to be stronger and stronger. And that concludes our discussion of the endocrine system. If you have any questions on that as you're filling out your outline or working on your lab, please let me know.